Imagine you're sitting inside a military command bunker somewhere beneath the hills of central Israel. The screens in front of you are updating every 4 seconds. Red dots, incoming trajectories, intercept solutions calculating in real time. You've been in this room for 19 hours straight. You've watched your team engage wave after wave after wave. And every time a wave ends, every time the screen's clear and the operators exhale, someone behind you says the same 3 words. Another one incoming. 8 times in 24 hours. 8 times that sentence was spoken in that room. And by the 6th time, by the time Wave 6 appeared on those screens at 2 a.m., the question being whispered between operators was no longer, can we stop it? The question was, how many do we have left? That question, that specific question, is what this video is actually about. Not the interception footage, not the government press conferences where ministers stand in front of flags and say words like, our shield held and the enemy failed to break us. This video is about what those ministers are not saying when the cameras turn off. And once you understand what that is, once you see the number they are hiding in plain sight, you will never watch coverage of this conflict the same way again. Let's establish something clearly before we go any further, because the framing matters enormously. What Iran executed between 2 p.m. on March 20th and 2 p.m. on March 21st, 2026, was not a missile attack in any conventional sense of that phrase. Military historians study 2 types of large-scale missile operations. The first type is the overwhelming strike massive volume launched simultaneously, designed to saturate defenses in a single blow and cause maximum destruction before the enemy can respond. Think of it as a wall of fire, everything at once, shock and collapse. Iran did not do that. The second type is something far more sophisticated, far more patient, and for the nation on the receiving end, far more dangerous. It is called attrition by design. You do not launch everything at once. You launch in waves, deliberate, sequenced. Time not to maximize destruction in a single moment, but to maximize depletion over time, to force your adversary's defensive system to respond continuously, to keep it engaged, to keep it spending, wave after wave after wave, until the question is no longer are we stopping the missiles, but do we have anything left to stop them with? 8 waves, launched across 24 hours. Each one arriving before Israel's defensive batteries had meaningfully recovered from the last. This was not improvised. This was not emotional. This was not a desperate show of force by a regime backed into a corner. This was a strategy, tested, refined, executed at scale. And the central insight behind that strategy is a number, a single number that explains everything. And that number is almost never shown on your television screen. Here is what the mainstream coverage shows you. Bright streak of light in the night sky. Another bright streak rising to meet it. A distant explosion above the clouds. A news anchor says, Israeli defenses successfully intercepted the incoming missile. That sentence is true. The interception happened. Israel's systems worked. Here's what that same coverage does not show you, what that interception cost. An Arrow interceptor, Israel's highest tier defense layer, designed specifically to stop the medium and long-range ballistic missiles, Iran was firing costs approximately $2 to $3 million per missile, per launch. David's Sling, the mid-layer system, costs roughly $1 million per interceptor. Iron Dome's Tamir missiles, the cheapest and most widely deployed tool in Israel's defensive arsenal, cost around $50,000 each. Now hold those numbers and put them next to this one. Iran's ballistic missiles, the Zulfiqar, the Khaybar Shekan, the variants used across all 8 waves, cost somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000 each to manufacture and deploy. Do you see the problem? In a standard Arrow interception, Israel is spending $2 to $3 million to destroy a missile that cost Iran $200,000. That is a 10 to 15 times cost disadvantage on a single exchange. And it gets worse, because Israeli doctrine does not allow a single-shot interception attempt against a ballistic missile. The consequences of missing are catastrophic: a city block, a school, a hospital in flames. So the protocol requires firing multiple interceptors per incoming threat. During this 24-hour operation, estimates suggest Israel fired as many as 6 interceptors per incoming missile in certain engagements, 6 Arrow interceptors against 1 Iranian missile. Now scale that up. 140 to 160 Iranian ballistic missiles launched over 24 hours, 700 to 1,000 Israeli interceptors expended in response. Total cost of those interceptors, somewhere between $800 million and $1.5 billion in one day. Iran's total cost for the entire operation, all 8 waves, all 150 missiles, the full 24-hour campaign, estimated at $50 to $70 million. Israel spent 15 to 30 times more defending than Iran spent attacking in one day. That ratio, right there, is the war, not the explosions, not the headlines. That ratio, sustained over days and weeks, is how Iran believes it wins this without ever winning a single conventional battle. Now here is where the picture stops being uncomfortable and starts being genuinely alarming. Israel's Arrow interceptor stockpile, the top layer of the entire defensive architecture, is not unlimited. Before this conflict began, intelligence estimates placed the total operational inventory at somewhere between 200 and 300 units. That is the entire high-altitude shield, 200 to 300 missiles standing between Israeli cities and Iran's longest-range ballistic threats. By the end of Wave 2, just 2 waves, just 4 hours into the 8-wave operation, Israel had already burned through an estimated 20 to 25% of that total inventory. Let me say that again clearly. 2 waves, out of 8, and a quarter of the most critical defensive stockpile was already gone. Then Wave 3 arrived, and Iran changed the equation. They introduced the Khaybar-Shikan, a solid-fuel ballistic missile with terminal phase maneuvering capability. In plain language, this missile doesn't travel in a straight, predictable arc toward its target. During the final seconds of descent, it moves, it adjusts course. It actively works to defeat the intercept solution your defensive system has already calculated. Against a standard ballistic missile, Israel's systems calculate the intercept point and fire. Clean solution, high probability. Against a maneuvering re-entry vehicle, that solution becomes invalid in the final seconds. The system has to recalculate, fire again, expend more interceptors per target to compensate for the increased uncertainty. During Wave 3 alone, Israel reportedly fired 90 interceptors against 15 incoming missiles, 90 interceptors, 15 targets, 3 still got through. 1 hit a highway interchange. 1 collapsed part of a residential apartment building. 9 people hospitalized. The news coverage called it a defensive success, and by interception rate 80% it was. Technically, but 80% interception means the 20% that wasn't stopped killed people and destroyed infrastructure, and this was Wave 3 of 8, and the interceptors consumed in that engagement were gone, permanently, and production was not going to replace them before Wave 4 arrived. This is the section that changes everything, and it is the section you will not find explained clearly anywhere in mainstream coverage. The United States manufactures approximately 6 to 8 Arrow interceptors per month, not per week, per month. In the 24-hour period we are discussing, Israel consumed an estimated 150 to 200 Arrow interceptors. At American production rates, replacing that single day of consumption would take approximately 20 to 30 months. Nearly 2.5 years of production to replace 1 day of combat expenditure, and that production rate cannot simply be increased by political decision. Arrow interceptors are not commodity weapons. They require precision manufacturing, specialized components, quality testing processes that cannot be rushed, and supply chains that span years of lead time. You cannot surge the production line the way you surge artillery shell output. The industrial infrastructure does not work that way. Now add the second layer of this problem. During the 12-day conflict in June 2025, the United States conducted an emergency interceptor transfer to Israel because stockpiles had already run critically low. Less than 2 weeks of fighting had depleted reserves to emergency levels. That was June 2025, before this operation, before 8 waves in 24 hours. And America's own stockpiles have not recovered since then because 2 years of supporting Ukraine's air defense requirements have drawn down American reserves in ways that are understood inside the defense community but not discussed publicly. There is no hidden warehouse full of interceptors ready for emergency airlift. What exists is what exists. And what exists is being consumed at a rate that no current production plan was ever designed to address. Israel's counterstrike campaign ran simultaneously across this same 24-hour period. Over 400 Israeli Air Force sorties into Iranian territory, 47 mobile missile launchers destroyed, 3 production facilities struck, underground missile storage complexes targeted. Wave 8 came anyway. Because Iran's missile infrastructure cannot be eliminated through airstrikes, it is deliberately distributed across hundreds of concealed locations buried in mountains, hidden in tunnels, dispersed across a country the size of Western Europe. You destroy 47 launchers. Iran has hundreds more. You strike 3 factories. The missiles keep coming. The counterstrike campaign was not a failure of Israeli capability. It was a collision with a strategic architecture that was specifically designed to absorb that kind of response and continue functioning. Wave 7 was the moment the conflict revealed its full strategic ambition. Approximately 35 ballistic missiles launched simultaneously from multiple sites across western and central Iran, not aimed at cities, aimed at the infrastructure that sustains Israeli military power. Nevatim Air Base, primary operating base for Israel's F-35I fleet, Ramon Air Base, a critical forward logistics and combat operations hub, and targeting coordinates that brought incoming missiles within 800 meters of the Dimona nuclear facility's perimeter fence. Every interceptor battery in southern Israel engaged simultaneously. The sky above the Negev became what witnesses described as something between a fireworks display and a nightmare. Dozens of intercept streaks visible across the horizon simultaneously, sustained for over 7 minutes. Israel claimed a 90% interception rate for Wave 7, the 10% that got through, a fuel depot at Ramon Air Base destroyed, fires burning for 6 hours, 40% of operational fuel reserves gone, a missile impacting 800 meters from Dimona, a residential neighborhood in Dimona City struck, 4 civilians killed, 23 wounded. Now let's talk about that Dimona near miss, because this is critical. Iran did not miss Dimona. Iran chose not to hit Dimona, yet. 800 meters in the context of modern ballistic missile accuracy is not a navigational error. It is a demonstration. Iran was communicating in the clearest possible language available to a military planner that it has the targeting precision to strike the facility if it chooses to, and that it has chosen so far not to. That is not a near miss. That is a message, delivered with the precision of a military signal rather than the randomness of a failed strike. And the government officials who stood in front of flags after Wave 7 and described it as a defensive success understood that message completely. They simply could not say so publicly. Here is the number that forces the conversation nobody wants to have. $1.5 billion in interceptors. One day, multiply by 30. You arrive at $45 billion in defensive expenditure for a single month of operations at current intensity. Israel's entire annual defense budget is approximately $24 billion. The math does not work. Not for a week. Not for a month. Not at any scale that is sustainable without American financial support at a level that would require congressional authorization, public debate, and a political fight that nobody in Washington is currently prepared to have. And here is what that unsustainable math eventually produces. Military planners call it target prioritization protocols. That phrase sounds clinical. It is not clinical. It means deciding which cities get defended when you do not have enough interceptors to defend all of them simultaneously. It means a general or a politician or a committee sitting in a room and determining that when the next wave comes and the inventory is critically low, certain population centers will receive defensive coverage and others will not. That decision, if it ever has to be made, cannot be kept secret in a democracy. And the political consequences of that decision becoming public are catastrophic for any government that makes it. Iran knows this. The 8-wave structure was built around this specific endpoint. Not to destroy Israel militarily, Iran's planners know that is beyond their current capability, but to impose costs at a rate that forces Israel toward one of 3 outcomes: accept a negotiated settlement that Iran can present as a strategic victory, allow defensive capacity to degrade to the point where target prioritization becomes unavoidable, or escalate beyond the current parameters of the conflict in a way that changes everything and carries risks that extend far beyond the 2 nations currently engaged. None of those outcomes is a clean victory for anyone. Wave 8 arrived at exactly 2 p.m. on March 21st, precisely 24 hours after Wave 1. The timing was not coincidental. Ballistic missiles do not launch on symbolic schedules by accident. That precision was a deliberate communication from Iran's military command to Israel's military command to Washington, to every government watching this unfold. We can maintain this tempo. We did it for 24 hours. We can do it again tomorrow and the day after and the week after that. Can you say the same? By the end of those 24 hours, 17 Israeli civilians killed, over 200 hospitalized, arrow stockpiles at levels that have not been publicly confirmed, but are deeply concerning to anyone doing the math. A fuel depot at Ramon Air Base destroyed, a message delivered 800 meters from Dimona's fence, and a defense budget hemorrhaging at a pace that the current financial and industrial framework cannot sustain. The stated objectives of this conflict were elimination of Iran's missile threat, regime change in Tehran, and restoration of regional stability. 3 weeks in, the regime has survived. The missiles flew in 8 waves across 24 hours. Oil is above $108 a barrel. Gulf states are quietly opening back channels to Tehran, and the interceptor production lines in the United States are running at a pace that cannot restore what was consumed in 1 day before the next sustained operation begins. The gap between what is being said publicly and what is being understood privately has never been wider, and the question that defense analysts, military planners, and strategic decision-makers in Washington and Jerusalem are sitting with the question that no press conference is answering honestly is not complicated. It is 3 words: what comes next? Because the clock that Wave 8 started is still running. And right now, nobody has a clear answer for what happens when it reaches 0.